So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Brene Lloyd and I work with Northwatch, and I really want to welcome all of you to the second in our 2022 Nuclear Waste Online series. This is our 10th year of doing these online workshops. We started because it was better than doing them in person during the winter months with winter travel, but the last few years there have been other advantages through a global pandemic to meeting online. So I'm really pleased that we've got such a wide geographic spread in our registrations this evening. We've got people really from British Columbia to Nova Scotia, a very great geographic spread, and it's really heartening to see that people across the country and really across Ontario in particular are tuning in to hear from the people
Her name, we lost you.
Renee, you're frozen if you can hear us.
Are you co-host, Wendy?
I will if Renee isn't able to come back. I certainly will. We'll just give her a minute. Something is happening. Okay, I think what we should do is I should just go on right now so we don't have too long of a pause because our time is limited. Oh, I think I see Brene coming back. I do have her script more or less if she can't get back in, so we'll still be in business.
And my apologies for that brief technological collapse at the end of the line, and sometimes we just lose power. So, and my internet is unstable, but we have two wonderful co-hosts, so we'll just carry on. So just briefly, background and context. So the background is that the nuclear industry in Canada has generated 3 million bundles of high-level radioactive waste. And we expect that number to double, according to industry estimates, to double in the coming years. Since 1977, the industry has been developing plans to bury that high-level radioactive waste. We're on about plan number 4 or 5 at this point. And the plan now is being led by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Despite all that effort, over more than 40 years, the industry has not been successful in getting a deep geological repository approved, let alone constructed anywhere in the world. So as of January 2020, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization was created in 2002 through the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act. In 2010, they launched a site search for a community that they would that they could declare to be informed and willing to be the host for all of Canada's high-level waste. There was at one point 22 different municipalities expressed interest in learning about this project, not in hosting the project, but in learning about the project. And as of 2022, that list of areas under investigation had been reduced to just 2 areas. to the Teeswater area in South Bruce in southwestern Ontario, and the Revel Lake area, 45 kilometers west of Ignace in northwestern Ontario. And I'm really pleased that we have panelists with us this evening who are going to talk about that siting process, about the NWMO's investigation in their community or in their area, and some of the community responses and the community concerns with this project. So our first question, so we're going to do this sort of almost talk show style. We have, I'm going to really unfairly, I've asked our panelists to be very brief in their responses. But what we want to do this evening is give participants a sense of the issues at the community level, at the regional level, and the community experiences and responses. And so we really wanted to look at both how the community is responding, but also how the NWMO is operating in each of these areas. And I think we'll see there's some diversity, some differences, and also some real common themes across the two different regions that are being studied. So we did work out with the participants what the questions would be in advance. And our first question is really an introductory question to introduce you, the participants, to these areas. So I'm going to ask first Charlie and then Michelle. I'm going to ask just to introduce us to the region. The NWMO has shortlisted to these two study areas, South Bruce, and the other they refer to as Ignace. We refer to generally as the Revel Lake area or the area between Ignace and Dryden. I think we'll start with Charlie. Charlie, can you introduce us to the area and just say a couple of words about what led up to the NWMO announcement in 2020, and really, tell us about the Revel Lake area and as an investigation site. Charlie?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you very much. My name is Charles Faust. I've retired from the Ministry of Natural Resources after a 28-year career. And the first half was spent in engineering services and the second half as Aboriginal liaison in Nipigon District. The first thing I'd like to talk about, I'm going to try and share my screen here. I'm going to come up with this, not that one. Okay, it seems to be have its mind stuck on that one. I'll try a new share. This was working.
All right.
Okay. Let me see here. Let me get rid of that one. I can't. Okay. Bernine, I wonder if I could ask you to try and find my screen number one.
Let me try. There we go.
Oh, thank you. So, first thing I wanted to say is it's important to understand the site selection process. So the present plan, 2010, as Bernine mentioned, involves identifying an informed and willing host community. This process, in my view, is not found in any legislation or regulation. The NWMO has made it up and continues to make it up as they go along. Their goal is to forge a relationship with a community willing to accept untold risks in exchange for what I would term the goose that lays the golden egg. But the project itself is still largely undefined and has never been done successfully anywhere. The map that I put up is a map of, it's from the Ontario website. It's Ontario Treaties and Reserves. I put it up to show you that make a point that Northern Ontario treaties with First Nations communities were largely negotiated using primary watersheds boundaries as the boundaries delineating the treaty areas. The orange one is treaty number 3, and the small button in the middle is represents approximate area of the proposed nuclear waste burial candidate site. Treaty number 3 and treaty number 5 contain the Ontario portion of the primary watershed feeding into the Red River and the Nelson River in Manitoba. Primary watersheds are typically those watersheds, the highest order watershed that lead into an ocean or a sea. Could you go to the second map, Renee, please? Thank you. So this is a map that shows the purple lines are delineations of tertiary watershed boundaries. So I don't know if you can see my pointer, probably not. I would ask Renee to help me out then. The red circle is an approximate area which contains the area under study. So the most of that area is mostly inside the Wabigoon River watershed, which flows to the up and to the right. So the chain of arrows follow that. The southeast end of that study area is the Turtle River watershed, which flows south off the map to the west and comes up into Lake of the Woods and ultimately up into Kenora, and they both join in the Winnipeg River down, and continue on into Manitoba. One thing I'd like to note in this map is water everywhere. I mean, this is a surprising thing to me still, having lived here almost all my life. The amount of water that actually comprises our, the surface area of our countryside. So the relative locations of Ignace down in the sort of in the lower left or right, sorry. Dryden in the upper left. About the middle is it's not really showing that much, but it's a little community called Diamond. It's on the Trans-Canada Highway. And of course, there's the Wabigoon River Ojibwe Nation, which is indicated there. So the question that comes to mind to me is, how is it that Ignace has become the jurisdiction that, quote unquote, gets to decide? The study area is almost halfway between Ignace and Dryden, yet Ignace is the one being petitioned. And I would point out that Ignace is not in the Wabigoon River watershed or the Turtle River. It is in the English River watershed with the arrows pointing north and eventually west, and would join with the Wabigoon near Grassy Narrows First Nation. So that is that's the lie of the land, as they say. If you could go to the next one, thank you. This is a little just the same type of flow map with the watersheds, with the study area included. So I'm going to try and go through this rather quickly because we were given 5 minutes, and I'm sure I'm pretty close to that right now. But so I've mentioned the borehole number 3. I've mentioned the Wabigoon watershed, the Turtle River watershed. I'm going to make a passing reference to the mercury poisoning of the Wabigoon River, which was covered in our webinar 2021 and is still available for you to view. It's the worst case of a toxin entering a watercourse in Canadian history. And it is our very own Wabigoon River that was subject to that downstream from Dryden, where the Reed paper mill introduced 10 tons of mercury over about 8 years with drastic consequences. So, the Rebel Lake area under consideration, which is the dotted box that we see, is located at the headwaters of these two very important river watersheds. And as I mentioned, both these watersheds contribute to the Winnipeg River and the Nelson River in Manitoba. So in conclusion, it seems counterintuitive to me that a community like Ignace or the Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation would be asked to demonstrate willingness to accept the risks associated with this project when the project itself is largely undefined. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlie. That was an excellent introduction. Michelle, can you take us through a similar kind of introduction, a very different area, but can you just introduce us to the South Bruce area and what led up to today, and particularly what led up to that 2020 announcement at the end of the NWMO that South Bruce was now one of only 2 areas still being investigated. Just introduce us to your area.
All right. I am Michelle Stein from the municipality of South Bruce. My husband and I have a farm just outside the town of Teeswater. Our municipality has a population of approximately 5,600 residents and consists of several small towns and hamlets with a large agriculture community. When did our community first become involved in the process? I believe the municipality signed on to learn more in 2012, along with many other communities. The CLC was created at that time to engage and inform the public, but for many of us, we weren't aware of this project. Reading through minutes for past meetings, several community leaders and the clerk were working hard to promote the DGR, but people outside of those circles seemed to be unaware of this proposed project. Our family only began to hear some talk about the project in the fall of 2019. So we attended a CLC meeting and we heard about what Finland was planning, and we heard that we needed to move the waste below ground because someday the ice glaciers were going to come. We had a few questions that evening, but unfortunately the people who could give us the answers weren't there. Little did we know that that would become the standard answer. Then in January 2020, I attended a visionary workshop, which I thought was an information opportunity. But instead, we were clearly told this was to just imagine how we were going to spend all that money that was going to be flowing into our community. Again, very few questions could be answered, including where the proposed site might be. I was told nobody knew if or where it could ever be in South Bruce. The next morning, we were shocked to hear that the NWMO announced that they had optioned and purchased 1,300 acres of land. This included the properties directly east and west of our farm. Still undecided about the project, we went into the NWMO office to ask a few more questions. What happens if this affects the quality or the quantity of our water? The answer we got back was, we're not at the point of answering that yet. That was when we knew that the NWMO either didn't have the answers or they knew we weren't going to like the answers. And our journey over the past 2 years has shown us it was both. Many questions they don't have answers for, and there are a lot of reports and information they would rather we just don't read. The proposed site is located just outside of the small town of Teeswater, which includes 2 elementary schools, a dairy processing plant, and it's situated on agricultural land with residents on and beside it. The Teeswater River meanders its way through this site, which is along the edge of the Greenock Swamp, eventually flows to the Saugeen River and into Lake Huron. Our area has many artesian wells, including the tourist destination in Mildmay. It is also known to have one of the largest underground aquifers that provides water to its residents. It truly leaves a person shaking their head asking how this exact spot has been labeled as the perfect place to store all of Canada's radioactive nuclear spent fuel.
And Bill, we're going to stay in South Bruce for a couple more minutes. Bill, how has how have the residents responded? What's been the response of people in the area to finding themselves under the NWMO's microscope?
Well, it's been an interesting activity since actually NWMO acquired the property. There has been really two groups that have formed. One willing to accept the risks associated with the concept of a DGR with the hope of achieving economic growth for the community. We in South Bruce have seen little significant or no economic growth and no significant growth in population for the last decade. The other group that was formed is opposing the idea of changing the makeup of the community from a farming to a mining community and not accepting the risk of an experimentally concept of a DGR. During the last 2 years, our group, Protect Our Waterways, has undertaken a number of activities in helping to raise the awareness of the NWMO proposal with the residents of South Bruce. Prior to our group creation, as Michelle has indicated, there was a group called CLC, which was created by a bylaw passed by the South Bruce Council. And for the first 8 years of that group, less than 100 people attended annually that organization. And the organization was created as a recommendation from the NWMO and as part of their 9-step process. Its purpose was to educate and inform the residents of the NWMO project and the impact, the cons and the pros of the project. It's our mayor's opinion that the formation of this group has not been successful in engaging the residents of South Bruce, given the number of residents that attended on an annual basis. In contrast to the CLC approach, our group went door to door in South Bruce in 2020 and collected over 1,500 signatures on a petition against the creation of a DGR. We've held webinars with speakers who provided the residents with the pros and cons of such a major undertaking, sent flyers and newsletters to the households in South Bruce to make it easy for the residents to keep up to date on the project. Our latest activity has been a campaign we kicked off in October 2021 called Our Risk, Our Choice, where we again went door to door requesting voting residents to sign a petition that a referendum be held in October 2022 election. That campaign was successful with 1,696 voting residents agreeing that a referendum with a simple yes or no answer on whether South Bruce would become a willing host community for the NWMO project. Next slide there, Bernane. This is an indication. We went to the council meeting in actually January 11th and presented a petition at that point in time, and we had 1,258 people that actually had signed the petition. We did not make it a formal petition at that time because we wanted to protect the names of the people that had signed the petition, and I'll come to that in a little later. And we were requested to come back, and we did so the other night. And by that time, the petition had grown 1,697. And this is a significant increase from a point of view of the treatment we received in the first case of the presentation to our council. Over the past 2 years, the municipality has become known, next slide, please, as a divided community. It's from our local newspapers. Hang on a minute, I gotta adjust something here. Over the past 2 years, the municipality of South Bruce has become known as a divided community. From our local newspapers, the CBC, national coverage, media in the United States, and beyond our community is making headlines as a community divided. While looking up some of these headlines to share, I was surprised to see that the battle included in websites where the individual posting was connected to the University of Barcelona. The South Bruce Council had a choice to help heal this division as soon as possible by instructing the staff to complete all of the studies by October 2022 and start the process of holding a referendum coincident with the October 22 municipal election. But instead, they ignored a large contingent of the residents who were requesting this referendum and voted to push the request for a referendum to the next council. POW was disappointed in our council's response to the request for a referendum by over 36% of the eligible voters of South Bruce. As a point of reference, only 2,182 residents voted in the 2018 election, which represents 46.56%. That's it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. Sylvia, I wonder if you could tell us what the response has been in the Northwest, in Kenora District and the Northwest more generally, and certainly what's been, what the response has been where you live in the Dryden area. Sylvia? Sylvia, your mic is off. There you go.
Thank you, Benin, and thanks to all the panelists that have come on tonight and to our listeners. As Charlie has pointed out, our communities are quite evenly divided to where the actual site of the DGR is, the NWMO wants to put it in the Canadian Shield. We about 35 kilometers from Ignace and 40 kilometers from Dryden is where the boreholes have been drilled. So in Ignace, yes, thanks, Wendy. As you can see, this is where Diamond is, that Charlie was wanting to show. The highway goes from here and up along there. And Diamond is there, and Denoric and Wabigoon, the little town of Wabigoon, before you get to Dryden. Now in Ignace, they were some of the first people, the town, the community, that really was quite interested in learning more about the whole NWMO project. So they were early on involved in NWMO putting an office in the center of the town and starting to put money into the town, a lot of money, and that made improvements. Of course, they engaged themselves with making improvements in the community and so on, having family events and lots of meetings and so on. However, it has left the community being very, very divided because they have strong opposing views, and they feel a real betrayal by their council members and distrust in what the council and NWMO are engaging in together. They're scared. Some have been bullied. There's been harassment, and other people are really strongly for it because they think it's going to be really helpful for their economy. Now, as we move on, the small little places of Diamond and Denoric and Wabigoon, these residents are really quite shocked that how close the actual site is from where they live. And they're really, really opposed to anything happening, or the DGR being buried there, the waste being buried. And they haven't been informed at all by NWMO about the risks involved or anything that is going on is when they, as they are moving ahead with their plans. So there will be probably small groups. We're starting to hear small groups are going to be starting up against the whole plan. Now, when we get to Dryden, Sunset Country Spirit Alliance is who I represent also. And we also are with the network of We the Nuclear Free North and Environment North and Northwatch. And started after we met Bernane and Doty in June of 2021. So we started by going to farmers markets and the fall fair. We were there for 3 days, and we met all the people who were representing us in the political sphere, and none of them really knew much about the whole program that NWMO has set out, the APM or anything. And they were not willing to put it on their platform either for the elections. So we've had meetings. We have been to Ignace and joined Bernane and Doty and company, setting up tables and giving out information and signs. In Dryden, we've had a very large push to sell signs and to have signs put up in the town all along the highway and the roads in the area. And that is going great guns. It's really improved the number of people that are aware now of what's going on with NWMO. NWMO last summer rented an office downtown. They called it the Ignace Township office, but in actual fact, the NWMO was paying for the rental and also had their office upstairs in that building. So we were very much alarmed. We also feel betrayed by our council, as they don't seem to be willing very much to listen to what we have to say about the risks involved in such a plan as moving the high-level nuclear waste here so close to where we live. So for the most part, I think a lot of people still do not know what the project is really about. It's been hard with COVID and everything. We did have some town meetings, and the attendees were really happy that they could have a voice and be heard of their concerns. We have been on a council, had a member on, myself actually, on a panel in December with the city council for engaging and for education, which Bernane and Doty was also on, and Doty. And we've been interviewed by some media. And the people really, I think there's a lot of people that don't know about it still, but others are very, very upset. And yet there are, of course, the other side, the parties that are very much for the project. And I know there was more I wanted to say. There is no newspaper now in Dryden. So that's one of the things that we're worried, that it makes it more difficult. And now we're starting just to have Zoom meetings with the groups here. And hopefully that will really help. So what else?
Great. Thanks very much, Sylvia. That was excellent. And I will say, from We the Nuclear Free North perspective, which Northwatch is part of it, Sunset Country Spirit Alliance becoming organized, established as a local group in the Dryden area has been a really very, very welcome addition. And we really thank you for all the really great work that you've done. It's been really commendable. I'm going to move on to our next question is for, well, I'm going to ask Wendy first. We'll stay in the Northwest a little longer and then go, and then we'll go to Bill in the Southwest. Wendy, the NWMO repeatedly, and it, our webinar title this evening, relates to that. The NWMO repeatedly talks about they're looking for an informed and willing community to host their deep geological repository. And they actually have a somewhat formal part of their program in pursuit of that willingness. Can you tell us about that willingness project and that pursuit of willingness as it's played out in the Northwest and particularly in the Ignace area? Oh, your mic's off, Wendy. There you go.
Yes, I will, Bernane, and thanks for the question. And it's been interesting to hear from our friends down in Teeswater, South Bruce, just to hear the parallels between the two communities. Let's pull up my notes here. So mostly my presentation here is about, it's about willingness. When I should introduce myself, I'm Wendy O'Connor, and I'm a member of We the Nuclear Free North and Environment North. And I have a particular interest in willingness, and there's so much that could be said on that, the issues of willingness and consent. But in the time allowed, I'll just give a little synopsis of what's been happening in the last year in the Ignace area. The township of Ignace has been quite active actually in the last year with willingness activities and trying to gather feedback from their residents. The township has a special committee, I think similar to something in South Bruce. They have their CLC, and the Ignace area has the Ignace Community Nuclear Liaison Committee, or ICNLC, which I tend to stumble over. They've been meeting regularly, and their meetings are open to the public, so we have viewed quite a few of those on Zoom. But in my opinion, the activities and the input opportunities presented to the residents this year just weren't very robust. It all actually seemed sort of scattered to me. They put up info tables in the town with usually little or no notice to the residents. I'm not sure how many they put up, but I think residents were expected to encounter them almost by chance. There didn't seem to be a lot of notice on them. I've heard that they set up alongside COVID vaccination sites, which actually seems like a rather good idea. But once again, their information opportunities seemed usually to be incidental to something else. But at their information tables, which was one of their methods of meeting the public, they gathered and recorded public input from chatting with residents there at those tables, comments people would offer. And they took note of those, but certainly any resident with opposing views would be unlikely to blurt them out if they thought their neighbors would hear, and they might feel that they were in a minority among people that were opposing if they had an opposing view. So I just don't think that's a great way of gathering accurate information about what residents think. It's not the only way they gathered information, but it was one of the major ways, I think. And I don't think this sort of input really should even be counted, but it appeared in the report offered at the INCLC meeting in November. Another big part of their information gathering activities from residents was what they called their willingness project, and that the big feature of that was their willingness survey, which was an online survey, so it was an opportunity for people to respond privately. That was available online, I think, beginning in August and closed up fairly recently. In questions concerning how willingness should be expressed by residents, this wasn't a question of whether they approved of the DGR, but how they would like to express their opinions and how they'd like the municipality to gather them. There were multiple choice questions in the survey, but there was no explicit option in any of the questions to indicate a preference for a vote or a referendum, a ballot, something that would be anonymous. There simply wasn't a box on the survey to tick for that. It's kind of a glaring omission, I thought. And apparently one or two brave residents actually wrote their preference for that into the comments box. But like many of the other surveys we've seen, I thought this one was manipulative. It was a leading survey. The questions were leading residents to gather that a referendum just wasn't on the table, you know, that perhaps it wasn't a reasonable option. It wasn't anything they could ask for. So, I wasn't favorably impressed by that at all. But in response to the news that Ignace was launching an online survey in August, our group, We the Nuclear Free North, composed an open letter to the residents of Ignace and arranged for it to be delivered by Canada Post, also into Diamond, Denarwick, and the Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation areas, just going postal code by postal code. And our letter, quite dense print front and back, but we hope it was readable. It covered the basics of our environmental and social concerns with the DGR project. And we hope that along with our other awareness activities in the area last summer, some of which Sylvia was talking about, this open letter would let people know that if they had concerns about the proposed burial site, or if they opposed it, that they were not alone. It had information on it that they could contact us. And I think it was a good awareness tool. So, because we are hearing from so many people that they don't even know this is taking place. And that's actually what motivated me to jump into this project, because it just seemed unjust that something so momentous could be happening, and that the people who were possibly going to be affected by this just didn't know. For the heart of their consultations with community members, Ignace hired the consultancy firm of Hardy Stevenson. And I have to say, this consultancy firm and the principal in that company, Dave Hardy, has done work in the recent past for NWMO and OPG. In fact, that's one of the specialties of this consultancy firm. They work with power companies. They also work with environmental groups and municipalities. But considering that the township of Ignace could possibly be in an adversarial relationship with NWMO, or I'm just thinking of the best term, but you can see what I mean, that the consultancy firm that has worked for the NWMO in the recent past just might not be the right choice. Nothing necessarily wrong with it officially, but in the interests of the appearance of objectivity, it just maybe didn't seem like the right choice for Ignace, or perhaps Hardy Stevenson should perhaps have turned down the potential contract. But in any case, that's who they engaged. And even though they had engaged this consultant, when it came to the key INCLC meeting in November, where the results of all the year's consultation were presented, and you expect the consultant or representative of the consultant firm to present that, it was actually an employee of the township of Ignace that presented all the results. So that just seemed curious. And Dave Hardy was present at the virtual meeting and made some incidental comments when he was asked. But for an onlooker like myself, the whole relationship between the NWMO and the consultancy firm and the township, and then the township and back around to the NWMO just seemed strangely murky. And it was hard to imagine that the necessary degree of objectivity and clarity of purpose could be maintained. The conclusion of the INCLC, after all this, a bit of an anticlimax, was that the Ignace residents would like Ignace Township Council to decide things on their behalf. And we were disappointed by that result, but not entirely surprised. And at that time in November, there wasn't a council meeting on the calendar for December. So we thought, okay, we'll just regroup and think about this. But it turned out that there was a special council meeting in December with little notice as far as we saw. We didn't see notice of it. And of course, no opportunity for public deputations because it happened so quickly. And at that meeting, the Ignace Council decided, similar to in South Bruce, that a future council would make the determination of willingness. So the whole process kind of ended with a whimper. We're aware that many of the council members and the mayor right now in Ignace are in favor of the DGR project. If the new Ignace Council this year is comprised of new people, we may see something different in the fall. So we will be staying tuned.
Right. Thank you very much, Wendy. And Bill, over to you.
Hi.
So
The NWMO claimed the process to determine willingness must be a community-driven event. However, in examining all the activities within the community regarding the project, it appears that the South Bruce Council and the municipality staff are being led by the NWMO and closely adhering to the 9-step process. This included things like the establishment of the CLC, the creation of the 36 guiding principles, and the funding of 4 dedicated employees within the municipality. In the 10 years the CLC has been in existence, some 80% presenters have made their presentation in support of the project and mainly been NWMO employees, but there's been only one presentation in opposition to the project. The establishment of the Visionary Workshop in 2020 created the 36 guiding principles. This activity was managed by Acorn, again, a company that's very well known to the NWMO. They were paid and hired by the NWMO, and they created the report for the 36 principles. Included in those principles was an item 9, which stated, the municipality will, in cooperation with the community members, develop and establish an open and transparent process that will allow the community to express its willingness or its level of willingness to host the project. The community engagement activities, like Ignace, actually had a consultant hired, and those activities started in June and July. In August of 2021. The process included visionary workshops, online workbook, in-person workshops, phone calls, and emails. Notification started in April by the South Bruce municipality using ads in the local papers and the radio, household flyers, and a postcard delivered to every household in South Bruce. Now, part of the study, then the consultant had decided that there were really 6 options that the resident should consider in determining whether the question of willingness. They were 1, an advisory community, members, the community engaged in activities, a community panel, opinion polls, a public referendum, or a vote of council. Now, only 230 residents actually participated in the process, but 139 of them selected that a public referendum be used. And you can see that on this chart that Bernane has put up. The results of the study was presented to the CLC committee and also to the South Bruce Council in November 9th. The consultant also presented some closing reflections of the process and the opinions of some of the residents that attended these events. Her conclusions were the community members, regardless of differing positions on the project, share similar values. They want trust, transparency, representation, being informed, and respectful of open dialogue. The second observation she made, this decision was potentially going to significantly change the community. It's expected and reasonable that there be a range of emotions, and that is okay. Being empathetic and respectful is needed to be accepting different perspectives. And we're not always seeing that in this community. There will be different conversation in the future, but the community is interested in having open, honest, and transparent discussions. Some feel a real deep lack of trust and consideration should be given how to address this. She was talking to the council at that time, and she asked them to think about that. In the report, she didn't mention at the council meeting, but in this report, this concern was with the council and the NWMO, but it got zero attention at the November 9th council meeting. Information, the next point she made was information about the next steps of willingness process should be clear well understood. Passing the decision onto a referendum to the next council, like what happened in Ignace, does not translate, in my opinion, to a clear and understood direction. It was interesting to see the South Bruce Council reaction to the report provided at the November 9th council meeting. After the staff had commissioned the study and spent $150,000 of the NWMO monies, little discussion occurred at the meeting about the project or about the study that was being presented. Instead, the mayor and the council, some council members took the opportunity to criticize one of our canvassers who was out doing the collection of petitions for the project that we call Our Risk, Our Choice, and that I mentioned earlier today. And that noted was really an omission by one of our canvassers who thought that the referendum had to be a binding referendum, would only be held during an election time. And that was not true. POW is noted earlier in the process of collecting signatures on a petition to have a referendum occur with the October election. POW once again treated without respect by some of the members of this council. In my view, the council again chose to ignore input received during the study process by the consultant and that of our campaign results, including the 1,696 residents who desire a referendum coincident with the October election. So I was really disappointed myself on how the council has reacted to not only the presentation given on January 11th, but the follow-up presentation on February the 8th. I thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Bill. And I find it fascinating to hear how much things are moved along on such a parallel track between, at this point, between Ignace and South Bruce, and I think the Willingness project and the timeline for that has been so similar in those two communities. So thanks very much to Wendy and Bill for walking us through those two different experiences, which have quite different communities, different outcomes in some ways, but so much in common as well, I guess, with a common master. So we're down to our last question, and we've got a different question for the Southwest and the Northwest, because we really wanted to explore some of the things that are not unique to each area, because certainly we have agricultural interests in the Northwest, but we have a question for the Southwest about agriculture and for the Northwest about transportation. And both communities have these interests and will experience the impacts of transportation. But we'll start with a question for Michelle around the agricultural interests. So NWMO is investigating South Bruce literally in the midst of farms and farm fields. Your area, as you've outlined, is really rich in agriculture and dependent on it. So what are the concerns in your area specific to the potential impacts of a project like this, both in its promotional stage and if it was ever actually realized for the agricultural community?
Like you mentioned, our community is an agriculture community, and the proposed site is on and under actively producing farmland. Many of us have recently been surprised to learn while looking at Bruce County's latest plan update that some of our properties are actually zoned as rural rather than agriculture. This is concerning because agricultural zone properties can only be used for agriculture-related businesses and purposes. A rural zoning would make it easier to approve a mining operation such as the DGR. We've questioned this zoning as other properties with the same soil types in other parts of our municipality are zoned ag. And according to the official definition, if there's ongoing evidence of agriculture, it should be zoned as such. We are trying to work with the county to get this rectified. It'll also affect agriculture in several ways. Despite claims from the NWMO that all levels of radioactive emissions will be safe, we're going to have daily loads of radioactive waste driving past our fields, our livestock, and our families. Emissions being released from the repackaging plant, and eventually when the containers fail, what could that mean for our water supplies? And who decides what safe is? In their February 2020 report to Canada, the International Atomic Energy Agency recommended that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission improve their radiation safety standards, as they were lagging behind international standards. And recently, several investigations have brought into question who the Safety Commission protects, the public safety or the industry. And how many safe levels can you be exposed to before it's not safe? For agricultural businesses in our community marketing to European countries, any increases could result in market. There is an amazing documentary produced about what it actually means to farm next door to the nuclear facility. I encourage you, if you get the opportunity, to watch Toxic Neighbor and learn about how that family and farm was affected. The NWMO also doesn't want to talk about nuclear stigma. Part of my family's business is selling lambs directly to butchers in Toronto. Our oldest daughter was talking about moving their family home next door, and we are going to expand our business to include more direct-to-consumer marketing. We've already been told by one lamb purchaser that he won't be able to sell our lambs because today's consumer wants to know where their food comes from. And grown beside an underground nuclear waste facility is not a selling feature. We've also asked our sheep milk processor if this project would affect our ability to ship milk. And their answer to us is they don't know at this time whether or not they would continue to take our milk. Chapman's Ice Cream has also stated that they have concerns and they don't want to become known for nuclear ice cream. A lot of their ingredients are produced here. The nuclear disaster in Japan also gives us insight into this issue, as farmers there are still battling the nuclear stigma and trying to market their products. Standing on my front porch this summer, the NWMO solution to stigma was, well, we would have to financially compensate you for that. How do you put a price tag on your home? How do you put a price tag on any future growth or expansion for your family's business? How do you put a price tag on your family's future? And we also, it's a mine. So we're going to be building a mine in the middle of a farming community. And with the mine comes a lot of big equipment, noise, and dust. Mining and farming just don't go together.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. Our final question is for Dodie. Dodie Legasic is with Environment North and very active part of We the Nuclear Free North. Dodie, my question is around transportation. And if the NWMO selected the Revel Lake area, the site between Ignis and Dryden in northwestern Ontario, the waste would travel very long distances from the current location at reactor stations. And most of that would be over 2-lane roads. So what are the concerns about transportation? And what are some of the risks associated with that transportation? And I think Wendy's gonna share a slide for you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. As Brennan has said, gratefully, my name's Dodie Legasic, and my issue is with the concerns and the risks that are involved in transporting high-level waste over such long, to the Revel Lake site. Okay, so the first thing that you've got in front of you is a map that shows you the 9 nuclear reactor sites. And if you have a look at number 9, that's Point Lepreau in New Brunswick. And that is 2,540 kilometers away from the Revel Lake site in northwestern Ontario. And then if you look at southern Ontario, numbers 2 all the way around to 6, that's where the majority of the reactor sites are. and from which 90% of all of the waste will be coming from. And that's about 1,700 kilometers just one way to the Revel Lake site. So the first concern I have is with the distances. If you look at Finland or Sweden, which NWMO is always quick to compare, it doesn't, you can't compare because both Sweden and Finland have a DGR proposed sites right by their nuclear reactors. Distances is the first issue. Everyone also knows, and I think Ottawa knows by now, that transport trucks emit a lot of carbon. In fact, they emit more carbon than any other vehicle. And so a second concern that we have is with the carbon footprint. If the waste is transported by truck coming from over a period of 1 year, it's estimated that there would be 2,630 tons of carbon emissions coming from those trucks in total. And that's probably a low estimate. If it is transported by train from all of these reactor sites, then we're looking at about 1,350 tons. So the answer to this problem is simply not to transport it. Even if it's transported in Southern Ontario and South Bruce, in that area, there's going to be tonnage of carbon as well. Just for your interest, I wanted to point out a couple of other things. One is about the volume that's going to be transported. There's going to be 120,000 tons of used nuclear fuel bundles transported. And again, if you compare that to Finland and Sweden, both Finland and Sweden, or Finland has 6,500 tons and Sweden has only 7,500 tons. You cannot compare that to the 120,000 tons in the Canadian proposal. From the 90% that you see coming from Southern Ontario, 53% of that waste is going to be coming from the Bruce plant, and 39% will be coming from Pickering and Darlington. So Bruce, Pickering, and Darlington have the greatest amount of waste, and those, in terms of transportation, that waste is considered OPG waste. And so it will be transported on these standard transport trucks using a UFTP, which is simply a used fuel transportation package. And that's what you see in the NWMO's mobile unit that provides you with information. What you don't see any information about is the BTP, which is the basket transportation package. And that will be for all non-OPG waste. And that is only in its conceptual stage. It's not a well-known form of packaging yet. In terms of frequency, we should all know and be reminded every single day that this will be transported 3 times a day for 45, 46, probably up to 50 years, because it's based on 5.5 million fuel bundles, and the reality is that the projected figure is actually 7.2. So that would be transported by truck, and if it's transported by train, it will be 1 train load every 5 or 6 days, and so that would mean about 15 to 21 loads or UFTPs per train. A very dangerous situation, but that's what the load level will probably be. Another area of concern that we have is with the number of communities that are being put at risk. This map is from our transportation card. We're still working on it. But if you start from the bottom, in Southern Ontario, you'll notice that I always choose Pickering and Darlington because it's closest to the 401 and then up to 400. But I should make note though, we should add, we can't add the main highway route because there isn't a main highway route from South Bruce. You have to travel about 100 kilometers and make 13 turns to be able to get onto Highway 400. But from Pickering all the way up using Highway 17 along the coastline of the Great Lakes, or by using Highway 11 up and around Kapuskasing. Both highways join in Nipigon, and then when you get closer to the site, which is between Ignace and Dryden, you'll notice that all along this route, all of those images that you see are communities. There's over 30 First Nations communities just in Northwestern Ontario. Between Barrie and the border of with Manitoba, there's 82 communities, there's 15 provincial parks, there's 7 treaty areas, and I could go on and on. But if you want to bring your eye back down to Southern Ontario, you should realize that you have in Southern Ontario very densely populated areas. Toronto alone has 2.93, according to the last census. It's 2.93 million people in its population. And every single train that goes through carrying high-level waste has to go to Toronto, or right beside Toronto, I should say, into the community of Vaughan, into the marshalling yard. And so Southern Ontario is really, really at risk in terms of the densely populated areas. So the answer is simply do not transport any of the high-level waste. The Chiefs of Ontario in February, on February the 4th from 2021, they all signed a resolution that stated that they do not want the high-level waste put into a deep geological repository or buried into the ground. They want it kept above ground at the reactor sites. Another area of concern that we have is with radiation exposure. Radiation exposure can be looked at in 3 different ways. There's the routine transport operations, which means that when there's a risk of radiation exposure, when the high-level material is loaded from the point of origin, and when it is unloaded at the site. And if it's the Revel Lake site, then we have serious concerns at any site it is about unloading into the processing plant. Also en route, the truckers are going to stop. They're going to fill up gas, and in Southern Ontario, there are gridlocks simply because of accidents that may happen around that will cause these trucks to be waiting in amongst traffic and emitting gamma rays, gamma radiation. In Northwestern Ontario, we were hard pressed to get down Highway 11 this summer without wondering whether we were going to be detoured because the smoke was so heavy from forest fires. Okay, so radiation exposure can occur anytime you are close to one of those trucks. And another form of exposure comes if there's an accident. And of course, anything can happen in a transportation accident with high-level waste. And if they're transferring, for instance, if they're doing intermodal transfers from a truck from South Bruce onto the train, then it has to go to the marshalling yard in Vaughan, then the marshalling yard in Thunder Bay. And if you speak to anyone that works in these marshalling yards, you know that there's always issues, i.e. derailments and problems with transfers that will cause radiation exposure. Terrorist attacks, that's the 3rd category. That's something you may not think would happen, but we didn't think the convoy of trucks would happen either. So that would be another maybe horrific source of radiation exposure. So be aware that gamma radiation is continuously being emitted through those cast walls, and the Sandquist report is one report that I highly recommend you reading. The last 2 points has to do with trucking accidents or collisions. I have the data that just goes to 2020, and I get it in every 5 years. And in the last 5 years to 2020, there were 7,010 transport truck accidents it just not in all of Ontario, just from Pickering to Ignace, just that route. And between Pickering just to down 401 to Highway 400, there were 3,450 transport truck accidents. And so Southern Ontario needs to be really, really concerned about that stretch of the highway system and the potential of high-level waste being involved in an accident. In our area, Northwestern Ontario, just outside of Thunder Bay, there's about a 200-kilometer stretch to the Revel Lake site. And over the past 5 years, the percentage of transport truck accidents has increased from 41% to 51%. In the year 2019, there were 149 accidents on that road, and out of that, there were 98 transport truck accidents. And that brings it up to about 66%. So we're really concerned about transport truck accidents up here as well. If there is an accident, then what's going to happen in terms of the response time? In Northwestern Ontario, the response time isn't going to be the same as it will be in Southern Ontario by any stretch of the imagination. They will have to bring in cranes, probably a crane to lift a UFTP. They have to bring in all kinds of heavy equipment. You're looking at long distances in order to get that equipment there. There is also a comment that I need to add, and that is NWMO's inadequate testing. They have a thermal test that it's ridiculous. It wouldn't pass, of course, in Lac-Mégantic, where there was a fire for almost 3 days with 72 crude oil tankers on fire. If one of these tankers, trains hits a train with high-level waste, what's going to happen? The puncture test means nothing when that NWMO has means nothing when it's rolling down a Canadian Shield embankment. The free drop test means nothing as well. It's totally inadequate, and neither is the immersion test that they have, because it will take hours and days to get a rail car or a transport truck out of water if it comes off one of these highways along the shoreline of Lake Superior. The very last point I want to make is that each and every one of you all along the route has to realize that if you check your homeowner's insurance, that you are not covered for nuclear accidents, and your homeowner's insurance company will not cover you for a nuclear accident. NWMO has a liability for coverage that's for about $1 billion, but that would be eaten up very quickly if anything happens within a city area. You're looking at billions of dollars. And so anyway, I think it's time that we really start voicing our concern. We don't want it in Southern Ontario, and we don't want it in Northern Ontario. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jody. That was an excellent overview, and thanks to all our panelists. Really, really, really great overview. And I know I pressed you for time, and you did well to not quite stick within your 5 minutes, but you were all very succinct given the amount of material there is to cover. We're going to actually now, I'm going to stop the recording.